Welcome to this video tutorial on how to orient and position CAD models in Calypso. So we'll start by creating a new measurement plan, and we'll come right up here to Planner and Measurement Plan Simulation. We'll come up to CAD and CAD File and Load, and we'll load the standard CAD cube as normal. Now, up until this point, we've just started programming, and everything's worked out fine. However, you may have noticed that when you go to move the CMM using CMM operation, which looks like a joystick, and you turn on your machine position here, you notice that your machine is already maxed out. So if you try to move your X minus, you can't. Try to move your Y plus, you can't. Try to move your Z plus, you can go a little bit. You can go Z minus, but you can't really retract above your part. All right, we go to base alignment in this window, and you have exactly the same problem. So we're going to learn how to position the part on the machine. Now for this, just because it's a cantilever style machine, you can't see much. This is in the way. So a lot of times I'll turn off the machine and I'll turn on the base plate instead, and this shows you really all you need to know. So we'll come over here to modify CAD model. It's the little cube icon, and I want to just show you a couple of little tricks before we really get started here. First things first, this starts off in the positioning tab. The two main tabs that we'll be focusing on here will be positioning and transformation, and you may also find that hierarchy is helpful in some cases as well, but largely it'll be positioning and transformation. So this interface leaves a little bit to be desired, in my opinion. There are really multiple different functions that are all nested inside this positioning window, and it's not clearly labeled. So you have translation, or you have manually move, or you have rotation, or you have positioning. And then one thing that applies to all of those is drag base alignment. So this is going to be probably the biggest checkbox that you have to worry about. And I'm going to show you how it works two different ways. So whether that's checked on or checked off completely changes how all of this functions. But there's not a good visual cue that tells you that. So it's something to watch out for. Another button we're going to watch out for is the center button. This can be extremely helpful. But as we start moving fixtures around, which we'll cover in a later video, we'll find that this can actually work against you as well. So these two checkboxes are very, very important for this dialog. So as of right now, I'm going to leave drag base alignment checked on, and we're going to come up here to position. Right? So we'll position, and the way that this is interpreted, we're positioning, and we're going to touch one point on our model for a from position, and then we're going to touch one point on our CMM machine for our to position. So again, the dialog leaves a lot to be desired here. So for our from position, I'm going to click on the part, and you notice that it gives us a normal vector. And notice that that's not centered in the center of that cylinder on the bottom face. I'm doing this on purpose. Right? And then I'll click once down here for a to position, and notice that it gives us the preview of where the part is going to move. If you don't like that preview, you can close the window and open it back up. You can browse to transformation and just come right back to positioning. So if we hit position, and now we click on the bottom, and then we click over here, you notice how that's picking up the position from wherever I click. Well, I'm going to clear that out again. I'll go to transformation and then back to position, just so we don't have to wait for it to calculate. And this time I'm just going to check on this center box. Now I'll click on, whoops, you know what? This time I forgot to hit position first. So this can be very frustrating about this dialog. Basically, if it doesn't work, you either close the dialog out entirely or switch to the transformation tab and come back. And just click position before you do this. This time I will click center. I'll click on the bottom. Notice how it picks up the center of whatever surface I click on, and center is still checked on, and I click on the center of the base plate. Notice how that centers this for me. Now in most applications that I've run into, you do want your workpiece to be centered on the base plate, but there are some applications when you're moving fixtures around when you don't really want this checked on. I would say for right now, for simple labs, just leave center checked on by default. Now also, I mentioned that base alignment, the drag base alignment checkbox is one of the most important. in this entire dialog. Let's see what that does. So I'm just noting the fact that drag base alignment is checked on. I'm noting the fact that this is what I'm moving, and I'm going to move it to here. I'll hit apply. Now, another thing I'll mention about this interface that I really don't like, the first many times I did this, first of all, I couldn't get it to work at all. But when I did get it to work, I kept hitting close before apply. If you hit close, nothing happens. Right? So hit apply. And notice that it appears that the entire base plate moved over to approach the part. But if we turn on our whole machine, you find that what actually happened is it moved the part to meet the base plate. And it also moved the entire base alignment. Now, unfortunately, this is one that I can't undo. So as soon as you do that, you're stuck there. If that doesn't do what you want, I recommend you go File, Close All. It's going to ask you, do you want to close all your plans? Say yes, and that has closed it without saving it. I'll come back to Create New Measurement Plan, and I have a blank slate. We'll come back to Measurement Plan Simulation, and you can see how this can be a pretty painful process trying to get your CAD models in the correct orientation initially. But you definitely want to do the work on the front side, and you want to make sure it's correct before you start programming. So again, I just imported the CAD file. This time I'm not going to bother turning on the whole machine. It really doesn't tell us any more than the base plate tells us. Notice the position of the probe is left over from whatever I was doing last time. We'll come in here and we'll go to, I forgot what it's called already, Modify CAD Model. We're in the Positioning tab. This time, I'm going to hit Position. I'm going to uncheck Drag Base Alignment. Notice that drag base alignment comes on checked on by default. We'll click on center because we might as well center the model. Click on the bottom there, and we'll click on the bottom here. Everything looks exactly the same as last time, but again, there's no visual cue here. The big thing is that drag base alignment is unchecked. I hit apply, and notice, first of all, it doesn't take as long to load, and second of all, our base alignment did not come along for the ride. All right, so if I close this window and I look at the overall CMM's position, hey, it did it correctly, but let's take a look at our coordinates. When we go into the CMM operation window, which looks like a little, as best I can tell, that's a joystick icon as seen from the front view. So maybe that's what it is, maybe it's not, but that's what I'm thinking. Now when we look at our machine system, we can actually move around to the left and to the right, which we could not do before. We can do that in the x-axis, we can do that in the y-axis, and we can do that in the z-axis. So sometimes this can be helpful if you're trying to look for a rough position of something. If you just want to move the probe out of the way of something because you don't want it to flag a collision that is not necessarily true, this can be helpful. So that works for the Machine Position tab, but let's take a look at our base alignment. Assuming that our coordinate system was the same as what we've been doing up till now, where it's the top surface, the front line, and the left point, our origin would be somewhere around here. Well, if we just manually move the probe to there by clicking on these buttons, and to do this we probably have to look from the front view to make it aligned, and it's kind of hard to see with the graphics view there, so let's just angle that off just a little bit, or maybe we could go to wireframe and turn shading off. Maybe that'll show a little bit better. No, that doesn't show much better either. All right, well, we'll try to get that aligned as well as we can from the front view, and then we can come over here and take a look from the right view, and we can align the y-axis, so we'll just pull that until it looks like it's in line. And from this view, we can also see the z-axis. And it looks like we're pretty close to our origin. The reason I take the time to do that is, number one, to show you how this window works. Can be very helpful. Number two, to notice that our x, y, and z axes are no longer correct. Right? That's because we didn't use the drag base alignment checkbox. Now, of course, we can still come in here. We can go to the base alignment, say OK, and we can populate this as normal. Right, so we're just doing the same standard base alignment that we would normally do. We're doing the plane, line, and point. Notice that this coordinate system is updating itself as we do this. You probably haven't noticed that up till now because our base alignment was already in the correct spot. But as soon as we say OK here, notice that it is now moving our part way out in space somewhere. Something very weird is happening, okay? So obviously that is not what we want. So let's again do a file close all, and we'll come back to a new measurement plan. We'll go to Planner, Measurement Plan, Simulation. All the same stuff that we did before. We'll go to CAD, CAD file load. We'll load that same CAD cube. And we'll open up our base plate, and then we'll open up our positioning window. This time I'm going to make sure that drag base alignment is checked on, which it will be by default. We'll turn on center. We'll click position. And this time we'll click on the bottom of our part and the top face of our plate. And now we'll hit apply. And again, the big thing here is drag base alignment. Watch what happens. We hit apply and the entire base alignment comes along for the ride. Now when we close out of this, we go into our joystick here. In our machine coordinate system, if we go to 0, 0, and 0, our probe is, 0, 0, and 0 is all the way up there. Notice that our probe is where it should be. You know, what we might want to do is just turn on the machine at this point just for a little more context, right? So our probe is exactly where it should be. As we move this around, we see that we have full range of motion in our machine still, which is good. So the big thing is, let's switch over to base alignment, and let's go to X0, Y0, and Z 1 inch. So I've been moving around using these scroll bars, but you can also just type in the window here as well, which can be just as helpful. So notice that that positioned our model correctly on the machine. But you might say, hey, the base alignment is still not where I want it to be. Okay, well, this is how we take care of that. We'll open this base alignment window up. We'll select our geometry as we have been. And this is really what we've been doing from the beginning. We just have one added step that we're positioning our model on the machine to begin with. Now, by positioning this model on the machine to begin with, we get the best of all worlds. We can still do our standard base alignment here. You notice that that shifted over a little bit when we touched off to the coordinates. Now we can do check measuring range, which will tell you if you have a large probe on there, maybe a star probe, and you're trying to probe from this side. It will tell you that you're not going to fit inside the machine's travel, which can be very helpful. And also, we can use the joystick function here to move the machine, and we can actually access our base alignment. And we can go to X0, Y0, and Z 1 inch. And just make sure that that jives nicely with what we see out of our coordinate system, and that is exactly what we would expect. In fact, we come down to Z0, and now that's even easier to see. Yes, we are exactly where we should be based on our coordinate system. All right, so that is all well and good. That's if we're trying to touch off to the top of the part, but I think we did enough labs on the top of the part already. What I'd really like to see, I want to work on this face of the part, but I still want to use the down probe. So that means I'm going to have to place this face of the part against the base plate of the machine. And I want this cylinder on the bottom, I want that cylinder to be pointing down the Y- axis. So let's close this. We'll go close all and yes. And this will help us see how to configure this for the lab that we're going to start next.